Fun can certainly be a subjective thing, but do you think these players are having fun? This demo surely sees how I completely outplayed it. The Pyro is an excellent game design lesson in how to design fun for the receiving end.
Oh no.
Yeah, sure, Afterburn can be annoying, but I think it's safe to say there's a more obvious example of unfun to fight. And what's even more impressive is that Pyro's most infamous weapon doesn't have it. Air blasts can be unfun to fight against, but in terms of sheer scale, the phlog has a much larger effect on the server as a whole. The salt mines have opened for business, and let's just say, I came with pickaxe and shovel in hand. Because whether it's a lust for easy kills, satiating an ego, or just becoming a complete and absolute rat, the phlog is a weapon that all may hate, but we can love. Today I am here to educate, discuss, entertain, and inflict suffering. And believe me, whether you're a masochist or a sadist, there's a lot of suffering when it comes to the phlog. Look, I get it's not exciting, but I need to get over the basic stuff. The phlog is a pyro primary. You get crits when you do your job, you can't air blast. It's that simple. Obviously, such a different weapon would require a completely different strategy than the stock flamethrowers, right? Yeah, no, you can often just walk at inattentive enemies and frag them by employing the sacred tradition passed down for years and years by pyros. Yeah, no. You're not immortal as pyro, but I think that WM1 is why the phlog has such a bad reputation. Now, I do have some recommendations if you struggle into the phlog.
Ooh, Alex.
Unexpected sentry gun. Put it in a good position and even an uber charge wouldn't save him. Sticky traps, most heavies, and it's important to remember that he's seriously restricted by his range and his health pool. Phlog pyros only really got tough to deal with once you add a medic into the mix. The vaccinator is your friend there. But I am here for the pyro alone today, and the #1 rule of phlog success is the flank. The flank is this brilliant tactical maneuver where you attack people when they aren't looking. Now I'll be completely blunt in saying that this isn't anywhere near as effective without the guaranteed crits. You see, air blast is a little too useful, so a pyro without crits with phlog kinda just becomes this free kill, honestly. Additionally, people don't particularly like phlog pyros and will go out of their way to target you. This means that without crits, we are actually going to have to make a plan before we dive in, as Pyro's inability to burst down multiple people gets really apparent. Now, there might be some Pyros who should just say to spam the scorchshot, but if you spam the scorchshot, then
please consider the following.
The biggest problem with a phlog is that players will typically try to kill you if they see you, so until we have crits ready, we're going to be mainly hanging out in the quieter parts of the map. Taking the sidelines will lead you to a lot more 1v1s, which can be a good thing. But if it's something like a heavy or a soldier who sees you coming with like ubercharge, it could just be a bad idea. Our biggest priority should be the element of surprise. There's an enormous advantage for the pyro, you can get in close before people spot you. It's even better when Buddy has low FOV and his friends just don't know how to fight a pyro. But for a lot of the weaker classes, you can often just tank their damage. But it's important to not get overconfident. You see, Pyro's basic strategy of running at people until they die can certainly work, but this is where your secondary choice and ability to become invulnerable are really valuable.
Oh, behind you.
Depending on your secondary, you can go from being a dangerous duelist or just be a dick. A good secondary, combined with our ability to become invincible at a moment's notice, means that we often control how fights are going to go. While your secondary is reliable, the invulnerability is not what it's cracked up to be. Yeah, in order to actually use those phlog crits can be a little troublesome in suboptimal plays. It's actually a very powerful tool to become completely invincible. The only problem is that it is not difficult to time a phlog pyro's taunt if you're familiar, and this can often just get you killed if you panic. The invulnerability, at the best of times, can save you from something that you should have and would have died to, but it also just kinda like delays the inevitable on occasion. So what can we do to actually make using the crits a little safer? There's this thing I do that you might have already noticed where I hug the walls to avoid people seeing me. Strictly speaking, we want to take as little damage going in as possible. It's definitely much better than just running at people, but it's also really good at avoiding damage. We can taunt to peek around corners before attacking. It's a little greasier, but it's valid as an option. The best taunt to probably use here is the high five. It's quiet, your class doesn't talk after initially using it, it's also pretty innocuous with a complete lack of movement. The only problem is that some people might walk up to you thinking you genuinely want to high five. We could fish for crits with the flare guns. This is the typical method for a lot of pyros, including using something like the scorchshot. But the detonator and the flare guns have both of their uses, and I'll be honest, I prefer to avoid the scorchshot at any chance I get. But do you know the deadliest weapon in all of Team Fortress? It's probably just using your brain.
Nothing wrong.
The most important thing is to simply not constantly die. Play a little safer if you keep finding yourself getting caught out. Top 5 hits of using your brain. Not dying to an obvious trap. Not dying to sentry guns. Not jumping into an overwhelming amount of enemies. Not risking it for kills when you have less HP than a kunai spy. Not wasting my time, I guess.
Wanna die, dude?
Thank you. Holy sh**. Oh yeah, what's your secondary, by the way? The tactics of pyro are obviously important to success, but they boil down to just surprising the enemy in any way that you can. Secondaries are where things get a lot more interesting. Some people might think that the scorchshot is the best secondary, but I'll be real and say that the scorchshot is literally on the bottom of the list of options. Not only because it's not all that effective outside of just like generating free oomph and spamming it into choke points, but I have this thing called dignity. There is no way I would be caught dead using both the scorchshot and the phlog. It's quite simply too evil, but if I were to hypothetically do such a thing, I'd say it's pretty good for getting free oomph, and you can get some cheesy kills, but it's also kind of like boring, lame, and it makes me feel bad. That pyro! I would much rather use the detonator. The jumping makes it far easier to get around with, and while the scorchshot certainly can jump, the detonator actually gets a decent bit of height. This opens up a lot of the map for flanking and diving. The ability to detonate it in midair makes it much more effective at pressuring people, but it's also a lot less spammable than the scorchshot because of this, so, you know, ups and downs. If I was going to spam something, I'd probably pass on the detonator, but the movement it can provide, while niche, is a lot more fun than the scorchshot ever was. Speaking of niche movement, the jetpack sucks. That is all. There are two weapons that kind of fall into the territory of why. If you want to use the can with the phlog, don't play MBM. Just use the scorchshot. If you want to use the reserve shooter, just use the panic attack. All we're really getting is the switch speed bonus, and the reserve shooter loses in that regard. Stock is certainly reliable, but personally I prefer the panic attack over the stock shotgun. The switch speed bonus is just too nice to have as pyro. It's also just kind of too damn good for dueling and being an actual threat close range. It's definitely a lot more defensive than the flares, so I usually end up only using it on maps like 5 CP or while I'm defending.
Stupid, goofy, heavy.
Pretty good for catching out players who can't really burst you down quickly. And finally, it's also really good if you're running into a lot of pyros. The other weapon that would be really good if you run into a lot of pyros is the Man Melter. Well, the Man Melter certainly has its place, particularly if there are a lot of enemy pyros and you are dealing with a lot of flammable teammates. Ultimately, I kind of just end up baiting my team to get flare gun crits that I miss, so I don't know. The Man Melter's good, maybe not in my hands. And finally, my personal favorite secondary, the flare gun. It is absolutely disgusting how I can snipe random players or straight up obliterate medics before they have a chance to react. The flare gun may be much more valuable for peel. Peel being where you're pressuring enemies who are attempting to get at your more important teammates, like snipers, medics, engineers. It feels good to hit, it can deal a ton of damage, and it lets you be a lot more dangerous into troublesome classes like Demo, Heavy, and Sniper, who don't usually fear a pyro is going to burst them down instantly. But how will people interpret my opinion without me explicitly stating it? I guess we'll never know. As for the last slot, some melees are funny, like the hot hand or the third degree, or the pan. Some of them are effective, and some of them, the rest of them, maybe not on the phlog. The two melees I really end up using are the Homewrecker when my engineers are just struggling, or the Power Jack for the bonus movement. The Power Jack also has this hidden ability where it crits half the time. This is largely due to how much damage you've dealt recently, but sometimes God rewards his faithful servants. Do you know what God does not smile upon? Spawn camping. This is a bit of a problem when you consider that the phlog is the best spawn camping weapon there is, because the flamethrowers won't fire when you're pressed against a wall. This means you can just stick your face in the spawn door and instantly melt people the moment it opens. Some spawns are particularly bad for camping, mainly just because of their design. But the only question I have is, how do I get to their spawn? Well, you're gonna have to sneak past the front line, and this is like the one place where the jetpack actually kinda has a use. You're gonna wanna hug walls and be as stealthy as possible, otherwise you're just gonna get caught out and die. But the best method for success here is... Now I know I said I wouldn't talk about it, but pocketing is where we get into the lamer parts of the phlog, and it's kinda hard for me to not talk about it. You might have seen in a couple of the clips that I had a medic healing me. And the only problem is that a lot of the time, it's not a medic that I know. It's just the medic on my team coming to a very good conclusion that the phlog might be a good pocket target. It's perhaps one of the easiest ways to get a godlike kill streak. And I think this is where the scorchshot meta really comes from. This is probably the fastest method to get crits. A pocket medic, particularly one you're communicating with, can make for one of the hardest combos to deal with in the entirety of casual. You can go vac if you're getting spammed, struggling against snipers, stock uber if you want to push forward without consequence, and not to mention that the crossbow can absolutely clutch situations you absolutely should have died in. Overall, far easier with a pocket. Another thing that's made easier with a pocket is the jetpack kamikaze. So you don't have to inherently die for this, but it's often worth it to pick out the really important classes like medic. If your team is all alive and beginning to push, it can be good to sacrifice yourself to ensure that the enemy team has no healing. Remember when I talked about God earlier? Yeah, well, it's probably a good point for you to pray that there's no sentry gun or no heavy. You are loud, very visible, and so it's best to not dive directly into the front line. Did I say the jetpack sucks? Because this is kind of why. If you have a pocket, this is a lot easier, but having to get the phlog meter with only your flamethrower to defend you can be pretty rough. I would like to reiterate, though, that this is a very effective method at ensuring medics don't survive a team fight. Now I'd like to swerve away from the phlog to briefly talk about a problem with casual. People like to play pyro. Whether it's because he's easy or he's reliable on a map like Payload, pyros are very frequent and show up in basically every match. You probably shouldn't have more than 2 pyros unless there's something ridiculous like an all-spy team. The phlog just doesn't have the pressure to push people off of points, particularly if you don't have crits. This kind of leads me to my 2 problems with the phlog. I rarely see shotguns on phlog pyros. More than a couple of people have made videos on the phlog telling you to just use the scorchshot. I'm looking at you, Elmaxo. Some of you need to clean up your pyro etiquette with this scorchshot business. I get that it can be good, but it's a matter of respect. Speaking briefly on the other issue, instead of playing phlog pyro, how about we get a medic? A single heavy? No? 3 pyros? Yeah. Alright.